My name is Jane. I was 9 in 1980, so 19 in 1989, and I'm from a little village in West Cumbria.
Could you tell me a bit about what were your favourite films, TV, and what was the fashion like in the 80s?
Well, I think fashion's easier to start with. It changed a lot in the 80s. So I remember one thing about the early 80s was if your jeans stuck out that far away from your legs, you were accused of wearing flares, and that was fighting talk. Everyone had to wear really, really tight jeans. And then everything went pastel. And being from West Cumbria, we didn't have any big shops, so all our clothes came from the market. The markets would be like a market in each town, like one in Workington on a Wednesday, one in Whitehaven on a Thursday, one on Monday in Cockermouth. So you got your clothes from the market. And everything went pastel for a bit. And then by the time I sort of hit 15, I went all a bit alternative. So everything went black and lacy. And then we all went through a phase of being original. So everything we got was from charity shops. So it was all like hats and charity shop clothes that were altered. And I think the worst thing about 80s fashion is what we did to our hair. In the early 80s, because of Princess Diana, everyone had their hair cut short. So you had 11-year-old girls with beautiful long blonde hair cut really short in a really naff style with loads of tips and gel in it and flicks. And then as the 80s progressed, it got into perms, and they just totally fried your hair. So you can see I've got curly hair, but I used to have a perm, and it was perms and tipped. So by the end of the 80s, my hair effectively just got shorter because it just fell off. And it was so split ends and everything. So every so often I'd grow it and I'd have to get it, it would just die. So the 80s was very cruel to your hair. In terms of TV, I can't really remember much. It's like a program. Yeah, I can't really remember much TV. And films, there was a cinema in Workington. We'd get the bus through to that. And it was a really narrow age, probably sort of 14 and 15, because at 15 I started going to pubs, so I abandoned going to the cinema. Oh, right, yeah, music. So as almost every human being my age from Britain, in the early 80s I had a tape deck, a radio tape deck, and you had to press play and record at the same time. You needed to record the charts and try and miss the bits out that the DJ was talking. And I still have all my chart tapes in the attic. I don't think I've got a tape player that works anymore. But if I hear one of those songs, I hear the next song in my head starts to play. So early 80s, it was a lot of electronic music. Not particularly cool electronic music, things like Howard Jones or Nick Kershaw and things like that. Lots of bands, yeah. And then later in the 80s, everybody says rave hit in 1980. It didn't in 1988. It didn't in West Cumbria. So it was Stock Aitken and Waterman in clubs. It was appalling. It was totally appalling. But there was some good music. But there was a lot of variety. You had everything from heavy metal to goth music to synthesized pop to just total dross, like Stock Aitken and Waterman type pop. I've always been into dance music, so that's what I listen to most of all. Oh yeah, I saw Live Aid on the telly and loved Freddie. I was really into Queen actually then. I was 14 and it was a really nice sunny day, and I remember watching Live Aid on the telly and watching the thing that it sticks in everybody's mind was Freddie and Queen. They were amazing. One of my friends went from school, and I was dead jealous. So, but yeah.
Do you remember what house you lived in during the 80s, or houses?
I just lived in one house. My parents lived in the same house for 35 years, and it was a terraced house in a village called Brigham. It was an old terrace. And it was built in 1710, this old terrace, and it was freezing. And my parents got central heating when I moved out at 18. But before then, and it just sounds like a cliche, but there wasn't just frost on the inside of the windows. We did once get frost on the bedclothes. It was so cold because we just had a coal fire. and that heated the water as well. With 2 coal fires downstairs. But it was a nightmare to get in from school and have to light the fire, and I was the first one in, and then you had to sticks were a luxury, so it was like just with paper and slightly damp coal trying to get the fire going, and then having to wash your hands in freezing cold water because the water hadn't heated up. And then there was a warmer room in the house, but I chose to have this big room at the back which had no heating in it at all and a really high ceiling. And I used to go to bed with a vest, my pyjamas, socks, and a hat on. And I had 2 duvets, a blanket, and a duvet cover. And I used to put my school uniform between the 2 duvets so that it was relatively warm in the morning. So I would get dressed while I was in bed because it was freezing. It was absolutely freezing. The house itself faced north. Our terrace faced north, and it was sort of built into like a limestone cliff, so it was quite damp as well. It had a lot of character, sort of really big, thick walls, and I remember thinking, oh, I'd never want to live in a modern house. And then I moved to Newcastle and lived in a 1930s house with central heating and double glazing, and I thought, I'm never living in an old house again. But yeah, that was our house. My parents lived there until fairly recently, and they've also moved to Newcastle, and they live in Fenham in a warm house now, and it's great.
And could you talk a little bit more about your community? Like, were your friends close by, and what was that like?
My village was very small. There was 9 people in my year. And to be honest, we didn't really, you have this cliche now of kids don't play out in the street. My kids play out in the street. But we didn't play out in the street. And I think it's partially because in Cumbria it just does rain all the time. So, I had some friends in the village. And then, I didn't get on terribly well in my primary school. But in my secondary school, which I got the school bus to every day, like everybody did. Everybody get the school bus. It picked up from a few villages and went through to Cockermouth. And then you just were in a constant state of waiting for buses. And like the buses were, there'd be one from the main road about every 2 hours and one through the village, twice a day. In some villages around near me, there was a bus every Wednesday. So I spent a lot of time walking as well between villages. It was really boring. I could not wait to leave West Cumbria. That's the reason I went to university, was to get away from the place.
And on the subject of the right to buy scheme that Thatcher brought in, what was your opinions on that, and do you think it was a good idea at the time?
Well, I lived in a terrace house. It wasn't a council house, so my parents owned it. My grandma had a council house, and my auntie bought it for her, and it wasn't a good idea because she bought it. She lived away. She lived in Southport. She didn't live in Whitehaven, and she bought it thinking that she'd make money out of it. But it was actually a bad thing for my grandma and granda because previously the council did all of the repairs. So if the boiler broke, they'd come and fix it. If it needed painted, it would get painted at the same time as all the others. But when after that, it was dependent on my auntie sorting it out, and she lived away, and my mum was quite close, so she bore a brunt of finding people to do work on their house. So. I don't know. I think people should have the right to buy their house, but I think a lot of people used it as an excuse to make money, to buy the house and then sell it on. And I also think that there used to be a lot of pride in working class communities. So on my grandma and granddad's council estate, everybody's garden was done, everybody's kids were turned out immaculately, and all that kind of thing. It was my granddad was a miner. But there was a lot of pride in the community, and then, I don't know, over the past 20, 30 years, it's kind of, that pride's been taken away, and they've just been, there are places that people aren't proud of, and people don't do their gardens, and people don't want to live there. Whereas actually when my grandma and granddad were given a council house, because they did live in where they were from. The pit village they were in was slums. And so in the 30s, when they were given a council house, they thought they'd died and gone to heaven. They had an inside toilet. They had coal fires in every room and thick walls, and the roofs didn't leak. And it was spacious because council houses are well built. So I think it's a shame that that pride has gone from those kind of places in many places.
Do you think that was because of the
No, I don't think it was to do with the right to buy scheme. I just think it's more of the social deconstruction of the working classes, if you ask me.
Did you have any jobs in the 80s? And if you did, what were they?
My first job was when I was 14, cleaning holiday cottages, because it's close to the Lake District. So the village I was in, a woman who lived across the road rented her house out for the summer, and I cleaned her house between tenants. And then when I was later, when I was 14, I got my first job waitressing for the almighty £1.25 an hour. So that's when I started waitressing, and I waitressed all the way, I guess for the next 7 years. So all the time I was studying, I waitressed. So first of all, I worked in a motel, just serving bar dinners. And then I got a job in this big hotel, which did weddings. And that's why I'm not married. Me and my partner have not been married now for 24 years because I hate weddings. We used to do 3 weddings a Saturday. Just huge, great big meringues of weddings. And it was the 80s, so it was huge, puffy pink sleeves and armies of bridesmaids. So we used to do 3 weddings a Saturday, the odd wedding on a Sunday, the odd wedding during the week, and I was also the bar supper girl as well during the week, and sometimes worked in the restaurant on a Sunday as well. So that was quite fun. It was this big hotel would be like, I don't know, maybe 20 waitresses on at any one point, a huge kitchen, and it paid for my drinking and my stupid outfits from charity shops. But work has changed an awful lot since then. It's like working in a kitchen was, the waiters were awful. They would be, it was so sexist. You'd get groped, you'd get your arse slapped. It was just endless torment the whole time you were there. And we just all accepted it as totally normal and didn't think anything of it, whereas, I can't imagine anything like that now.
Well, actually, going on, gender roles at the time, do you think, what were the the jobs available, do you think there was difference between what boys may have been offered to then what girls may have been offered? My jobs were just purely to earn cash. I wasn't, that was no career structure for me. I was just doing part-time jobs while I was at school. And actually, I think in the 80s, they put a lot of effort into getting women into science. So unfortunately, I grew up quite close to Sellafield, so they were always pushing that. But there was a big drive to get girls into science, and I was certainly pushed into science. So I did, chemistry, biology, and geography. I think A levels, not maths. And I did that, and I went into biology, and I'm a marine biologist now. No, I don't think so. And then, it wasn't in the 80s, but then, I did marine biology, and then I was the first female fisheries officer in England. So. And I worked on trawlers, so that's why I swear so much. So I worked on trawlers for 15 years. So I don't think that I was pushed in a particularly feminine direction career-wise. I didn't have the impression that there's anything I couldn't be because I was a girl. I didn't have that impression at all.
So yes, I wasn't told to do typing or cooking or anything like that. They were definitely pushing girls. There was definitely a drive to push girls into science. And also then there was full grants. So I knew I'd get a full grant. So I got a full grant to go to university, and the fees were free. So and I actually wanted to do, I was also good at art, but I was advised away from art into pursuing more like all sort of sciencey A levels. But yeah, there was a big push to get people into university. So believe me, I'm not a fan of Thatcher, but that her government wanted everybody in higher education. So yeah, and you got a full grant. Well, it was means tested, and I qualified. So and then your fees were free. So when I went to university in 1989, I got £3,000 a year, and my fees were paid, and it's interesting. West Cumbria, I think, had an artificially high population. So if all my grandparents were from Cumbria, but if you go back a little bit further than that, they're from Glasgow, they're from Newcastle, and people moved to West Cumbria in the beginning of the 19th century. Am I getting this right? 20th century. 20th century. So end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, people moved there for the mines and for the steel works. And the town Workington, I mean, the clue's in the name. It's a Victorian town. It's not particularly old. Whitehaven expanded a lot. Whitehaven was a Georgian town. It was a bit older, but then and the pit villages appeared, and now those industries have gone, and the population is too high there. Really, there's nothing there. It should be agriculture and fishing, and it can't sort of sustain that. But the population of West Cumbria is dropping. So in West Cumbria, there's a really strong accent, and it hardly exists anymore because it's just this coastal strip. Because the Lake District is just it's a theme park. It's just pretty. There's nobody real lives there. You go to Ambleside, you can buy Beatrix Potter stuff and gaiters, but you can't actually buy a loaf of bread. And it's quite a transient population. So, but when I was growing up, there was a very strong West Cumbrian culture, a very strong accent, and gradually the industry's gone. I'm not sure if it was worth propping up. I think so. I'm an environmentalist, and I can't support coal. For all that, there's jobs. I can't. It's not worth the air pollution and climate change. And the steel that they made there, well, the ore isn't there anymore. That's the industry's gone abroad. So I think what's happened to West Cumbria wasn't so much in the deindustrialisation of the north as a government policy, which has been elsewhere, more kind of global economics. It's not economic to run those kind of mines and steelworks in such a place, really. What they're left with is Sellafield, which isn't great. They've got this really toxic legacy. It's already radioactive, so you may as well carry on burying waste there. But there's a huge loss of population from West Cumbria. The biggest export from West Cumbria is young people. People leave as soon as they can.
Oh, what are your thoughts?
What I'm always struck by the 80s as a whole is the cliches of it. I actually recently went on to a party. It was an 80s party, and it was quite funny. If you people are like, oh, you're going to be wearing pink leg warmers and fingerless gloves and stuff, and it's like, well, actually, I didn't wear that in the 80s. And it's like with every decade, people pick one style, one type of music, and say, right, that's it. So you're guaranteed when you say anything to do with the 80s, you'll have a yuppie with a brick, and somebody will be playing "Don't You Want Me Baby" in the background. That is the 80s cliche. Growing up in West Cumbria, there weren't no brick mobile phones, there weren't no yuppies, and the 80s was a period of job losses and unemployment and general misery. By the end of the 80s, it was awful. So towards the end of the 80s, I went, I had a boyfriend at university before I went to university, and we went visiting, like hitchhiking around the country, visiting mates in different houses, you know, like visiting all your friends in places. And they were in places like Birmingham and West Bromwich and Nottingham, and the inner city areas and Manchester were awful. It was just, there was so much industrial decline. It was like places like Sheffield, and they were just the centres of cities. There was the centre, then there was this complete ring of Ming, where it was like almost a no-go zone. And then in the 90s, that all sort of got titivated up, and you kind of got like, you know, your sort of your Ousburnie type areas and that kind of thing now. But it was really, the north of England in the 80s was really quite grim. It was a dismantling of the old industries, wasn't it? So, you know, Thatcherism dictated that we didn't support old industries anymore. You know, there's the theory that she wanted to dismantle the unions, because in the 70s, the unions have been very powerful, and there was lots of strikes, and they pushed wages up and living conditions. Hey. But so she wanted to dismantle the unions, so she did target the industries with the big unions, undoubtedly. But to some extent, if you look at what happened here, it happened all over Europe afterwards. Those big industries, we don't have them in Northern Europe anymore, big manufacturing industries. So, you know, steel's manufactured in China or Bangladesh, or it's gone somewhere cheaper. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it's difficult to know, because obviously it's expensive to produce things like that here, because we have like anti-pollution laws, whereas you can just break ships up in Bangladesh on the beach and release whatever chemicals you like, and it's doing untold amounts of damage there. So as a result of, there was this big upheaval where people, like say my granddad, he would have grown up just expecting a job in the mine, whether he wanted it or not. That's what was going to happen to him. Or like a son would follow a father into a job in the steelworks. That whole certainty went. So there was lots of, suddenly, particularly men were unemployed. And so it was a state of flux, I think, in the 80s. And the South bounced back a lot faster, but in the North, where we'd been particularly dependent, where whole towns were dependent on one industry, it was really very difficult. So you could get jobs. You could get crap jobs. You could get waitressing jobs. You could get supermarket jobs. But for a man that was used to supporting his entire family, that's not what they were looking for.